plot twist. I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves in a second. First of all, really excited to have all of you here. Really appreciate you guys coming. And I think today's panel and this topic in particular are going to be really interesting. So to kick off, we have Albert, Vineet, and Drishan, who you'll all meet in a second. Albert works at LinkedIn, Vineet at Robinhood, and Drishan at Google. So I'm actually just going to give them a chance to introduce yourselves. So for the audience, how about where you work, how you got interested in that particular role at the place where you work, and how you got interested in data science to start with.
Cool. It's working. So hey, everybody, I'm Albert. I work at LinkedIn. I've been there for about 3 years now. I studied math when I was in college and also statistics. I got interested in data science because I found that I could actually use my skills in industry, which I wasn't actually sure about when I was studying math and statistics. And I found it to be a really good fit because it's a dynamic role. What I do is product analytics, which means that I work with product managers, engineering managers, design, UER, a whole team of people to come up and build the right product. So that comes with figuring out what the right strategy might be, doing experiments, designing metrics, and then running analyses. So I find that to be pretty fun.
Hi guys, I'm Vineet. I was studying computer science in college back at CMU, and after that I joined Robinhood on the data team. So at Robinhood I was actually, as opposed to Albert and Drishan, I work more on the data infrastructure side of things. So I joined Robinhood when I was still pretty small and kind of worked on building the data infrastructure from ground up. What really got me interested was, I think one of my focuses at college was distributed systems. So it kind of fit really well with large-scale distributed systems and data infrastructure.
Hi, I'm Drishan. I work at Google in Google Search. In particular, I work in the question answering team. So basically, if you Google something like what is question answering or what is communication in data science, you get like one paragraph on top. It's my job to get that right. And how I got into data science, like Albert, I liked math, and this is probably one of the only jobs you can do with it. So. Yeah, and before this, I studied computer science and machine learning for my graduate school, and before that, I studied electrical engineering for my undergrad.
I studied math too, so there's another job that you can do. So actually, one of the things we care a lot about at Springboard is bringing learning to life and being very human. So in the spirit of that, in addition to their data science introductions, I'm going to ask each of them to tell you where they grew up and one thing that they do for fun.
Great. I grew up in San Diego, so I love going to the beach, and also now I play Ultimate Frisbee with the LinkedIn team.
I grew up in Calcutta in India, or as people call it now, Kolkata, and I like hiking and playing squash.
I grew up in about 10 places, I guess. So I usually tell people it's Delhi in India or a place called Chandigarh, if you're familiar with that. And one thing I do for fun, recently I've started learning stand-up comedy, but I should mention I'm terrible at it.
Amazing. So we have something to do later in the panel. Cool. So as many of you know, today's session is going to be focused on communicating with stakeholders. So obviously, if you're learning data science, it's not enough to just be able to manipulate data to be able to do the analysis you need. But if you want to influence business decisions and get the buy-in that you need, it's really important to be able to communicate as well. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. In the spirit of that, I would love to ask each of you in turn why you think communication is important in your job to sort of bring your analysis and insights to life.
Start. I think usually in data science you work across like different kinds of branches of an organization, and the data science part is like one part of a larger project. So you have the part to sort of shape business decisions, and you have data, you have insights about the data, and you have evidence to support those insights. So but it is not going to be very useful, and your true impact is going to be determined by how well you're able to communicate it to other people, especially the non-technical people.
Yeah, I think that's a very solid point. In addition to that, I think especially when you're working at a company at the size of Robinhood, which is relatively small, what happens is that a lot of the decisions we make as a company, a lot of the paths that we take as a company is kind of shaped by the data that we have. At that point of time, whether it's the leadership or at times even engineers kind of turn to the data scientists to bring some kind of information out of the data. But what is really important is if data scientists, like both of them said, they have really fascinating math backgrounds. A lot of what entails with that is not something that everyone would really either maybe understand or really care about. What is really important is a data scientist can effectively communicate as to why that particular insight is important, and what is the high level effect and the cause of that kind of insight, and that communicating that and kind of giving a confident direction that this is why the company should move in this direction because this is what the users want, or this is basically what is good for the business is a very effective means of communication.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think that the way we see the role of analytics within LinkedIn is that we're a partner. We help the product managers figure out what the right direction should be, what the strategy should be. And so from that perspective, if we do the best analysis, we have all the insights ready, but we don't deliver them in the right way, that might actually have no impact on the company. It might not be actually beneficial. So it's actually very important to develop those skills. I think that my personal bias is I want to learn all the technical things. So I want to keep learning all the skills, what the newest techniques are, learn how to implement them, just get my hands dirty with that. But actually, in practice, there's two sides to it. Both from the very start, figuring out what is important to measure, what's important to analyze, and working with the product managers throughout the whole process. It's not good enough to have good communication skills if you did the wrong analysis from the very beginning. So there are a lot of aspects to it.
Awesome. That's actually a great segue to the next question that I want to throw out to the panel, which is tell me about examples of times where you feel like great communication really brought something to life or influenced a business decision, or on the flip side of that, sometime maybe you did a really killer analysis, but then communication didn't go so well, and then you didn't get the result you wanted as a business because of that.
I can start. So personally, I don't have, at Google at least, I don't have a bad story about not communicating well. I think the reason for that is twofold. One is that the people I work with usually have PhDs and they're very good at interpreting it. And the second reason is that, like Albert said, that it's important to figure out what the people are looking for. But at least for my team, it's a simpler problem because we know what the user are looking for because they're searching for it. And but I can give an example of one thing that I think that my team or generally Google does right, which I've seen is not done very well in other places, is that a lot of people make data-inspired decisions instead of data-driven decisions. What it means is that you've already sort of made up your mind and you say that, okay, let's look at the data to support that. And that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do, but you should know that you're not making decisions based on data. You're just giving evidence to support something that you've already decided. And this is, I think psychologists have a lovely name for this. It's called confirmation bias. And you should avoid that.
Yeah, I think one of the things at Robinhood is, and I think it's probably true about most companies, where typically when you go down the route of data scientists, kind of buzzwords-driven instincts in the valley is that, I want to try to go into these fancy machine learning, AI, and whatnot. Those are absolutely cool things, but one thing which is key is to understand what problems actually require that and what problems don't, especially at the size of Robinhood. We do not have we may not have the resources to put machine learning and AI into absolutely everything. So it's really important. One of the things that I have seen work really well is having that communication and kind of building that trust, such that which by virtue of communication, the data scientist kind of builds onto him or herself, is that like really be able to communicate when that problem requires some kind of like sophisticated machine learning or some kind of AI versus when a simple statistical model or just simple heuristics can actually solve the problem. And if it does, like, then buzzwords aren't really that important at that point of time. And in addition to that, one thing coming more from a data infrastructure side of things is like good communication is oftentimes what we try to do is, and as you would see in most companies, is you will have a lot of data visualizations and dashboards, which the purpose of them is to answer certain questions without actually having the stakeholders to go and bug a data scientist or a data analyst. Like if you can just get a question by looking at a dashboard, that should be the best outcome. And the real good thing, like the real important aspect over there, is to really understanding your audience. Like what are the questions people care about? What are questions people do not care about? Like if they have these questions, they'll come directly to someone and ask it, but in most cases they won't. So that's, I think, very key in terms on mainly the data dashboarding or infrastructure side of things.
Yeah, actually, I've seen both of what you guys have said at LinkedIn. LinkedIn has a very data-driven culture, but there's still a risk where people want to confirm their own opinions. And so it comes back down to making sure that as a data team, we know what the data says, and then we can bring that and voice it at the right times, like whether it be individually or in a meeting, so that people know you can't go down this path, this is what the experiment says, there's a negative impact. The other danger we have of being a very data-driven team is that sometimes we overanalyze. So the product managers might ask for a ton of data points that they don't actually need to make their decisions. And so we also have to come in from the other side and say, actually, this is one way that we can answer the question without getting all the details. Because in the end, you'll never have perfect information, and you do have to make your decisions. So 2 examples of when communication went well and when it didn't go well. One story is of when it didn't go well is I think what's really important is to establish the partner mindset. And so sometimes as data scientists, we can do all the work, we write all the documentation, the design, our fellow data scientists are happy with it, and then we make this like really nice deck. So like all the charts look really good, everything looks polished, there's like a clear 1 point on every slide, we deliver that really well in the meeting, and then nothing happens. Right? And you ask, like, why didn't anything happen? Well, it's because there was no follow-up. Like sometimes you drop that deck and you think that you're done, but actually if people aren't taking those recommendations, then you haven't done your job to communicate. And so it's just like in baseball, when you gotta like swing all the way through, or whatever other sport, you gotta follow through on what you've done. So that's one thing about communication. An example of when things have gone well is when we understand really what the product is interested in understanding, and we answer that question for them. So one was we're trying to understand what the value is of getting the LinkedIn app on the phone. And so we did various analyses to prove that value, and now all the execs know that number and it sticks in their heads, and you can hear them quoting it at like the company all hands and things like that. And then it actually shifts the company strategy, so we're investing now a lot of money into driving app activations. So there are a lot of cases like that as well internally within the company, where we've established that great culture where people trust us, and they always ask the question like, what does the data say? And when we can bring those data points out, it does influence the company direction. So that's really rewarding.
That's great. I actually want to emphasize this a little bit coming from the business operations side of things. So one of the things that my team does at Springboard, and going back to my days at McKinsey, a question that I want you all to ask yourselves in your future data science careers or as you do analyses is this question that was hammered into my head while I was at McKinsey, which is, what is the so what? And what I mean by that is when you do an analysis or when you come up with some kind of finding, answer the question of so what, or why does this matter? What action is the business going to take based on the analysis that I'm doing? And if you're not clear about what that is in your head, think about that before any kind of a meeting with a stakeholder. To Albert's point, you could have this beautiful deck with beautiful charts, et cetera, but the one thing that a business leader or a business operations team is going to remember at the end is the so what. What do I need to do after this meeting? And then it makes it easier to follow up if that's very clear for me. So that's just a push that I want you to all to keep in the back of your mind as you continue through your careers. I want to open this up for Q&A in a second, but before that, to preempt a question that we get all the time, I would love to hear from the three of you any best practices you have for communications, for scoping problems, things like this.
I'll just say that to add to Albert and Ravi's point, I think it's important to do these things beforehand, like before doing any analysis, figure out that this is sort of what you're looking for. Like this is the metric. If it is less than a certain value, I won't launch the product or something. So the idea is that you should have the goalpost set before you're trying to score a goal, because otherwise you're just like you're just going to score afterwards. You can just put the goalpost wherever. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I think to Drishan's point, something that data scientist once told me kind of resonates well, that if you do not, and probably you guys realize that, but if you do not take care, almost any question can be answered with the same amount of data. So you can basically try to wrangle the data in whatever way you want to answer the question in whatever way you want. And a key thing important over there is to try to really understand as to. So for example, for us, typically you'll see people trying to solve really core problems of the business. For example, if Robinhood is launching crypto and we want to understand certain aspects of how the business will work as far as our relations with third parties are concerned and things like that, we will often try to look at our data to figure out kind of to basically enable us to understand how this data will affect our relationships with these third parties, what should our float be and things like that, without going into more details about the business. And the idea over there is to really understand what problem we are trying to solve, and with just the goal of what problem we are trying to solve, try to approach the problem, not with how I want to solve. That should not be the starting point of solving any problems.
Great. So when I came to the conference today, I got a bag. It said "Never Stop Learning" on it. I see all you guys have that as well. And I really like that because I think the best general advice I can give is to be observing the people around you. So there are a lot of people who do this really well in the companies that you'll go to. And when I first joined LinkedIn, I was completely new to it. Didn't really know what I was doing. So I just looked for great examples of people when they gave a presentation. I just paid attention. What are the things that I like about the way that they presented? Or when they're running a meeting, what is it about running this meeting that made it so enjoyable and so efficient? How is it that someone sent this email communication? How did someone rally a whole team behind their idea? So I think what's really important is to keep that learning mindset and be looking for good examples around you.
As a side note, I think this is generally very good advice, not just for communicating, but generally for data science, that you will be irrelevant in a couple of years if you don't update your skills as well. So what I studied in college in, I think, 2016, no one uses that anymore. So you should keep on learning, which is good for Springboard, I guess. So yeah.
That means we have to keep learning and updating too. Cool. So just one thing I want to add there, again, coming from the business side, I'll give you a couple of things you can actually practice. So the first thing I will say is anytime you present, take a stand. And what I mean by that is you can be giving a business recommendation, or you could be taking a stand on what kind of analysis you should do, or you could be taking a stand on, I'm going to address this part of the problem, but not that part of the problem. But in any communications, when you're presenting with business leaders or someone who's making a decision, take a stand. And that will force you to think about what your analysis actually means or what you should do before you start communicating. So that's number one. Number two is, and this is very awkward for people, but tape yourself for a minute talking. And there's two reasons why this is useful. So first, watch it for content, and you can see how you deliver your own content. It's shocking how little this happens. You never actually watch yourself present, and it's very cringeworthy. If I watch this panel afterwards, it will make me cringe. but it's very, very powerful. And you'll see how quickly you make a step change in your communications if you just have a friend tape you for a minute, go back and watch it, and then do it again. And the second reason you watch it is to actually see your presentation. You can see things like, do you emphasize points? Do you take pauses? Things like that. And actually having to watch yourself on tape will really help with both of these things. So that's my one piece of advice to all of you.
Yeah, it's actually, if I could jump in, it's actually super important to take a stand and have an opinion, because sometimes data scientists, we think, let's just get all the data ready and then have someone interpret it and make the decision. And actually our job is to interpret that data, because we've sifted through all of it, we understand it best, and we can make that recommendation on what the team should do. I also like the second thing that you said about taping yourself. I think it's also great to have feedback from other people. So open yourself to feedback, tell people, hey, I want feedback, I'm gonna give this presentation, I want feedback on how I did afterwards. And it's really helpful, it was helpful for me. When I sent email communications, people pointed out, like, you just sent this really long email, I didn't even want to read it. And so that was really good feedback for me. And I was really happy when there was one time I sent an email and he said, dude, this is the shortest email you've ever written. Like, good job.
Yeah, to Albert's point, one of the advices I'd once got from my mentor at Robinhood was, anytime you're speaking in a meeting, it's this temptation that you want to give as much information as possible in one go. Don't do that. Like, one good way of doing that is like actually have a mental timer and try to stop at a certain time. That will make you like be very brief with the point you're giving, and then wait for follow-ups. Like, someone can follow up, but don't try to give all the information in one go.
I guess I'll add to that one more thing. You should know your audience too. I mean, if you're talking to non-technical people, you should probably not be talking about hyper-parameter tuning on TensorFlow models. But yeah, I think everybody made good points. As far as feedback, you should give us feedback how we did today. And I'm not looking forward to the tape afterwards.
Awesome. Great. So I want to actually open this up to questions. And sometimes when you open up a panel to questions, you get cricket silence. So to prompt people that don't have anything in their mind, just think about why you chose to come down here to this panel instead of the other sessions. There was obviously something that made you come here. If there's something you're curious about, we'd love to hear from you so that we can answer things that are interesting to you. Otherwise, we're happy to keep talking, or Drishan can do stand-up. But I would love to hear from you guys before we do that. Yeah. I can give you the mic, or if you guys can speak up if you have questions. Yeah, perfect.
What do you suggest on how do you transfer from the stakeholder side to the data science?
Everybody hear that? Perfect.
Basically, the way I understand, you're saying how you sort of move from a business side to the data science side, right? I think you've already sort of done half the things. Like, if you're already on the business side, that's the part that is relatively hard for us, I guess. So, but the data science side is, I think, it's nice to think of it as you bring a very different perspective as, let's say, what we would as just sort of like knowing math. So, and it's not very hard. Like, it's not a super hard problem. The maths that they use is pretty elementary, and if you just practice a bit, you should just do some courses, I guess. That's pretty much it. And just don't be afraid to fail, and don't be afraid to ask something even though it might look stupid. So one of the things that someone told me when I started work was that if you're not able to figure something out in 15 minutes, you should just ask. And I think that was the best advice I ever got.
One of the things that LinkedIn emphasizes is career transformation. And so we've actually had people go the other way. I've had data scientist friends become product managers or on the business side. We've also had people like from business operations do that switch the other way around. So I think one thing that's helpful is to, in the company, look for mentors. It could be people even in other areas who can coach you and develop your skills. If you have the chance, like we've had data scientists kind of act as PMs. We've also had people who are not in data scientist role kind of act as data scientists and do rotations within the company. And that gives you some of the hands-on experience beyond what you get just through a course.
There is a lot of aspects to data science. Some of them require a lot of core skills. Some of them you can kind of pick up without knowing really the real nitty-gritties of I don't know, some kind of regression or something. And one of the aspects that I've seen work is I've seen business people at Robinhood kind of just look at the Slack channels for data teams or the data scientists and pick up little tasks. Like if they see that there's a task that they probably feel like they have everything necessary to kind of pick it up, they start doing that, and that kind of gives you a good way of kind of really like shadowing one of the data scientists and kind of understanding what aspects of their daily life is something that you need to brush up on. And that's, I think, a very good and gradual way of transforming into that aspect of things.
The only last thing I'll say is I really like Drishan's point of, I very strongly believe you can learn from people the best, especially people above you. And there's two specific things I would suggest. A, what he was saying and what Albert was saying as well, absorb from people around you who are more experienced. But the other thing you can do is, even with people that, I guess you're the stakeholder for people that are currently presenting you information, so just sit with them, because I think, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but people in data science are always happy to get into more and more detail about their work. And so if you're willing to sit with them and understand it, that's probably the best way that you can learn. Slowly by slowly, you just sort of like absorb more details from them. So sit and like understand more than just the so what.
Actually, one of my good example of this, one of my favorite PMs is someone who will write his own queries. And so like as data gets democratized, everybody should have access to the data. And one of the PMs, he tries to save me time, lets me do my own analysis by running his own analyses. So he's written scripts to query on big data systems as well.
This is definitely real. I'm actually enrolled in Springboard's data science program right now, so I can get better at that side. So cool. Another question? Yeah.
That's it. I was wondering, maybe touching upon something, the point that sort of Ravi mentioned earlier, but could you maybe say a words on the possible fine art of the difference between telling the stakeholder what they need to know as opposed to what they came to you wanting to know?
Yeah, so something that often happens is people come to us saying, like, can you give me the number for X? Or can you give me this statistic? And so what we do is we ask them, like, why do you want this? We have to first understand the problem. If we get down to the problem, then we can help them figure out what the right solution is, like what the right statistic should be to answer that question. And that can also help with scoping as well, because if you let people keep asking you, you'll get a ton of requests. And these requests just keep stacking up. And you might not actually be spending your time answering the most important questions. So that's one thing that we do.
I think one of the other things is that you should be, the reason you're doing the data science part is because you're not unsure of something. So you should completely walk into a meeting or do an analysis knowing that whatever you're thinking can be completely wrong. So you should be open to it. And when you're talking about like, how do you communicate that? Well, I think I'll reiterate one of the points that I mentioned, that you should set these things beforehand. Like tell them that this is what I'm looking for and this is what the analysis is going to show. I try not to let data drive my decisions. Try not to let just the data drive my decision. I should know what I'm looking for beforehand as much as possible.
I think a part of democratizing access to data is the fact that like today, like we are making all the different kinds of data accessible to people, and a lot of times we see that people will run their own queries. I think one of the challenges over there is what Drishan mentioned, that a lot of times companies tend to go from a data-driven organization to a data-inspired organization. Like when you have access to all the data, you'll try to like really confirm what you already know. And one of the important things over there that data scientists can do is actually, when you understand the kind of insight they're trying to get from that piece of data, like try to be the one who is even negating that kind of information, like right in the beginning, because you understand the problem that is trying to be solved, and you understand how all the different sources of data, or how all the data looks, and try to kind of nip that inclination towards becoming a data-inspired organization in the bud itself.
Good part is you have evidence for it. You have data for it.
I'll just reiterate what I said earlier, just take a stand. And I know it's like the scariest thing sometimes to do, to put yourself out there, especially to people that are making a decision, but you'll find more often than not, people making those decisions find it very refreshing when people tell them what they actually think. It's great to have another perspective.
Do you mean fear of me missing out, or? Yeah, okay, great. So that's definitely one way to say it. It's like this is what we would lose and try to play on the fear. You can also play on the optimism of like this would be the upside. There are different ways to go about it. One thing that we've actually seen is that sometimes people don't take it right away. And we just store that analysis away. We have that documentation. And in 2 months, 3 months, people are suddenly excited about this area. Maybe they had other priorities and we didn't read them too well, but the priorities shift in 2, 3 months. We come back to it, we say, hey, we have this whole back pocket of analyses. This is what we think we should do if you want to move this metric. And so sometimes you don't expect it, but the analyses we've done, if you document them well, can actually be just pulled out very easily and used. But yeah, I think there's a big risk to not speaking up. Sometimes you feel like people already have a direction in mind they want to do, and the data says something else. Well, it's still better to speak up than to kind of say, okay, it's not going to do anything anyway, because at least you have a chance to convince people and you can start shifting the way they think about problems.
To anyone that didn't hear, the question is basically, if your stakeholder isn't exactly sure what they want, how do you deal with that situation and communicate with them?
Yeah, I can start. I think kind of to reiterate what Albert and Drishan both have already said, and I think even Ravi said this, is like a lot of times when you come up with something, you take a stand, and that's probably not what the stakeholders are asking for or looking for. But if there's something that you feel is important for the business, that you're like absolutely objectively the data is kind of guiding you towards, like just take a stand and explain, and be ready to answer the so what. Like be ready to answer like when you're taking a stand, you can almost be like you are going to be the guardian of the data and basically answer any rebuttals to it with like data and math, and answer it objectively.
Another way of saying that is like be thorough with your analysis. I haven't faced such a situation because I usually have seen a very data-driven culture, but generally I think it's always good to have a full sort of story, like do the analysis in every way you can think of and present the whole story, and that usually helps, I guess. Yeah, that's it.
Actually, you bring up a really interesting point. I think that beyond the product managers not knowing exactly what they want, sometimes as data scientists, we don't know either because it's an iterative process. So unlike engineering, when maybe you can say, I want to build this, let me just design everything and I know the way to get to the solution. Data science can often be a lot more of a winding path where you look at the data, based on the data, you then think about new hypotheses and you adjust which area you're going to focus on as you keep exploring the area. So it's actually helpful to be a partner throughout the whole process. So from the beginning, build that good relationship with your partner so that when they're asking you a question, you know why they're asking you. And then walk through it with them. So you can share the data iteratively, brainstorm and think about it together. And then that way make sure you're aligned the whole way.
We also have a few people watching on Facebook Live, so I will get back to you all, but I want to answer one question that's come in via Facebook Live as well. So the question for all of you is essentially, when you're kicking off some kind of meeting or problem solving, so imagine it's the first meeting that you're having about solving a problem, how do you balance between discussing business impact and technical implications in that kind of a first session? Does that make sense?
Kind of, I think the way I see it is like, so your job is not just to look at the trees, but to look at the forest as well. So you're also supposed to be involved with the bigger picture, and especially in like the first initial meeting, it's always better to look at the larger point of view so that when you're actually doing the analysis later on, or when you're going to the technical aspects, you are very clear on what you're looking for. So in those meetings, I think it's usually, at least for my case, I sort of listen more than say more, and look at what the other person is looking for, and then try to drive my analysis that way.
I think that's a very strong point. Like listen more than saying more. What are the core implications of like most meetings would be that if it's a new product that you're going to start working on, a new feature, and like try to absorb basically what the goal is. Like who are you trying to help? Your customers. How are you trying to help them? What is it that they're looking for while they will use this? And then try to basically define after the meeting as to what is the path you're going to take, and what is important to you. And it will be iterative. Like you will experiment, you will form hypotheses, you'll debunk them, but try to always know what the mission of that product is or that feature is.
When we kick off a project, it's great to have data science in the room. And something that we help with is we can help the team understand what is the right tracking we need to set up, what is the right experimental design, what's the right time frame that we can expect to complete this project if we need to actually test everything thoroughly. So in the very beginning, we're not actually thinking about what data queries we're going to run. We're helping set up the project for success. So we're bringing the right concerns, given our experience of what we've seen before, of what actually needs to be set up from a data side so that this product can be successful.
Thank you. We have time for more questions. I saw some hands on this side, and I know I've been biased, so please. So for the Facebook Live quote, folks, and anyone that didn't hear, the question is, how can you break into a data science team, both from your perspective, and how can you make it compelling for the people that would hire you onto their teams?
Take that. Though my answer will be slightly different, because one of the things at Robinhood that we have done so far is it's actually we have not differentiated between data scientists and data infrastructure yet, at least. It's one team, but if you form these mental boundaries, like you said, there is always the stereotype, like the data scientists will be hard science PhDs. And one of the things that is interesting is like just learn, like the same answer as like how you move from like business to data science or anything. Just be willing to learn, like solve your like perform your responsibilities. But other than that, like if you are, at least for us, we are part of the same team, like there will always be me trying to learn from a data scientist, or the data scientist trying to learn from me, and that always has to be a continuous process. And that's, I think, the best way to break into that.
I also heard you worked there, so it's good you don't work there anymore. I don't think this is a very nice place to sort of like divide people. I think it's always better to have like a mixture of data scientists and data engineers and other people in the same room. Otherwise, I do not think it works very well.
Yeah, to add to both of those, I think that one thing is really important is the mindset. So don't think of yourself as different from the other people. But once you're on the team, you're part of the team. And so that's something that we've told people as well, like don't even worry about what your title is, but just you're part of the team. You've been, people trust you with the responsibilities, and you build that trust up over time. So as you keep learning and keep helping people, then you'll find that you'll start to even gain confidence in yourself as well. And another thing that I found helpful is I guess there are different types of data science. So you might be focused on more of an engineering heavy type of role, one that involves a lot more machine learning or math. Or you might be doing one, like my role is analytics, and I don't have a PhD. And so we've actually had team members come from all sorts of backgrounds. People come from biology, some with PhDs, and from engineering, from computer science. And so I really like this field because it's very diverse and it requires a very diverse skill set. And so people from all of these areas are able to tailor their backgrounds into this role.
Actually, one thing just to add is the best data scientists I've seen so far are the ones who understand at least something about data engineering or infrastructure, and vice versa. Like the best data infrastructure people I've seen is someone who can empathize with and understand data scientists and data science.
So we have to end, and I know there's a ton of other questions, but the four of us will stay here. I'm also the person standing between all of you and lunch, and I don't want to be that guy. So if you want to ask more questions, we'll all stay here for a little bit. Please come find us now, anytime, the rest of the day. If you have other questions, again, really appreciate you all being here, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.